Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Andrew Denton, Chief Executive Officer at Alfa. Andy leads the group and joined the organisation in 1995. He then became a member of the board of directors in 2003 as sales and marketing director and was made chief operating officer in 2010 prior to becoming CEO in 2016 and spearheading the lead for the IPO, where Alfa now is listed as a global organisation on the FTSE. Andrew is also director and joint founder of the Leasing Foundation, an organisation that supports the leasing and the asset finance industry through charitable activities. Andrew's incredibly passionate about diversity, inclusion, CSR, and was also a former trustee for Cancer Journey, which has now been folded into Macmillan. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. And it's great to have you on the show because obviously I've had the opportunity to get to know you and the wider organisation. I've seen the epic journey that you have been on. But for those who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, I wonder whether you could give us a little brief introduction into how you came to be where you are today, because you've made some significant changes since you joined as the young Andy back in the day to Alfa.
And you did make me sound very old in that intro.
I'm terrible. And you're still young as well. I should say you are still very young.
It's been a really interesting journey. I mean, in common with a lot of people at Alfa, I'm a practitioner. I'm a computer science graduate, which a lot of my colleagues would now find it quite hard to believe. So I'm a software engineer by training, and I joined Alfa in what was then CHP Consulting in '95 as a developer because I knew some newfangled technologies. Worked out that I was okay at selling software, so I had a slight change in direction there after developing, leading projects, all that kind of stuff. And as you say, enjoy being sales director, but because of the type of thing that we sell, it's a very, very hands-on practitioner type sale. It's not sort of knocking on the door or cold calling. It's all about having a lot of depth of knowledge. And it sort of seemed to happen by osmosis. I just found myself doing more and more and more within the organisation. I was always brilliantly mentored by one of our founders, Andrew Page, who remains our executive chairman, and he's sort of brought me along. Has been very generous in that way, which of course inspires me to be generous and give lots of responsibility and to surround myself with terrific leaders as well, which we've done, and it makes working a joy. And hopefully some of the things that we're here to talk about today are based on the idea that I have to come to work as well. So it needs to be the right workplace, doing the right things with the right credo, surrounded by great, diverse people from all sorts of backgrounds, and doing good things, having a great impact on the communities in which we work, so we can look at ourselves in the mirror. It just makes us more effective in every way.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for sharing, Andy. And I wonder, before we go into talking about CSR and the great team that you have, because I absolutely concur, it is about sending the lift back down. You've been given opportunities by those who have really believed in you in your very early career, and I see you and hear others from within your organisation speaking highly of you and saying you absolutely do the same. But before we get into that, I must ask the question. You're obviously at the helm of a listed organisation, which is very exciting, been through a big journey. But did you see yourself at that position when you were, and I'll say it correctly here, the very young Andrew back in the day? Was it something you aspired to reach as a position? Because when you were doing computer science and you modestly say that maybe you understood some about the tech, but clearly you understood a lot about the tech. But was it something that you did? Was it in the family? Was it something that, as you were growing up, you envisaged yourself perhaps going on to do?
I guess kind of yes and no. I mean, I didn't have any clear goals in that way, and on some levels it's almost dangerous to box yourself in too much, isn't it? I mean, you find your own path as your experience develops. But in retrospect, an obvious retrospect, my dad was had a very, very commercial job. I mean, he's one of my great inspirations, no longer with us, but he was incredible at his craft. He was a soldier. He lived quite the life from the Rhondda Valley in South Wales. A real working class guy, and he eventually worked as a buyer for a manufacturing company. So he was sort of on the other side of what I enjoy doing, which is selling and relationship management and stuff like that. And Dad very much believed in rather than the aggressive sort of tit for tat type negotiation, he strongly believed in partnerships. And so yeah, arguably there was a bit of what I do now and what makes me tick in Dad. But no, I mean the idea that a lad from Felixstowe could be running a listed company still seems a little bit strange. It's certainly very humbling, and to hit the cliche, I really do stand on the shoulders of giants, and there are a lot of leaders within Alfa, and that's the important thing.
Wonderful. And what about your mum and your wider family? So you must be terribly proud of you. I know that your dad is no longer with us, and I'm sure he's looking down thinking, my goodness, my boy's done a great job after kind of growing up in Felixstowe, coming from kind of a humble background, which is huge social mobility there.
Mum is from Enfield, North London. There's a big family still kicking around. We're all in touch. I think my mum was one of 9 kids, so Nan was busy. And yeah, it's a similar thing. Yeah, of course, she's very, very proud. Mums and their kids, and she's a very, very agile and nimble 80-something these days, and she's still in the house she shared with Dad in Felixstowe. So actually, things that are good about COVID, and we all talk about the effect that the COVID lockdown has had on ways of working and kind of forced us to prove different ways of working. It's very easy not to phone your mum. Very easy not to phone your parents, and mum's now getting on with the idea of Zoom and FaceTime, and probably she has more social contact than she's ever had because she's got access to this technology, and we're all bothering to do it, and family FaceTimes and goodness knows what else. So she's kind of enjoying herself at the moment. But yeah, of course she's proud. She's also very leveling as well. Mum's very good at telling me what she actually thinks, so there are no flies on her.
That's absolutely brilliant, and I think that is so key. And I love that. Just having this chat with you, straight away, I think some of the best leaders are those ones that are incredibly human and are willing to show almost this kind of slight air of personal vulnerability and modesty, because to make sure that you do keep your feet firmly on the ground is absolutely critical. And especially as you've said here, in the environment that we're living in today, obviously we have COVID, and as always, I expect you to have the glass half full mentality, because you are a very positive person. I think it has brought about a huge sea change when it comes to ways that we communicate and the ways that we interact with individuals, and proves that actually we don't need to be necessarily sitting in an office 9 till 5 to make great things happen. But yeah, I mean, it's very, very interesting times indeed. And I think, the more kind of the more humble and the more human our CEOs and business leaders can be, the better, because frankly, we must try where we can to be glass half full people and try and look for that silver lining in every cloud, because God knows there are terrible things going on in the world at the moment, including all the terrible things going over the pond in the States with Black lives.
And I think we have to bear in mind that it's very easy to see it in the abstract, but it's an issue everywhere. And it may be that the authorities are not as weaponized here in the way that they are, for instance, across the pond. But the pressure that the Black community has been under, the casual racism that the average Black person sees every day in their life, and we couldn't hope to empathise, because from my perspective I will never ever encounter that, but I think we would be, and we're not. I think that leaders of all kinds are not seeing it that way, but it's definitely not an American problem, it's a global problem. The hope, I think, is that this time round those of us who see ourselves as allies to the Black and other ethnic communities want to effect a permanent change, and I think and I pray that there's the momentum and the will to do that. But we have to be action oriented. I mean, it's important to put your head above the parapet, and I think you were talking about what is a modern CEO, what is a modern business leader. It's far more than leading a company these days. We do have a responsibility to our people and to the communities in which we work, but I think we also have a responsibility to say when something is just wrong. It's not political. Racism is just straight up and down, full stop, ocean going wrong. then you say so, but we need to be part of the solution now. And I think and hope that the parameters are set up in a way that we could make a permanent change. But as you say, I'm glass half full, but I want to try and do my bit, and Alfa will do its bit as well.
I couldn't have said what you said there better. I absolutely concur. This is a global issue and we must call it what it is. It is straight up racism, and it is a global problem highlighted by the tragedies, obviously, that have happened across in the States. And again, interestingly, you said, I couldn't hope to empathise. I absolutely agree. I think unless you are actually living, breathing, sleeping the feelings and operating within your environment as a whether it's a Black American male, female, or crossover in the UK or wherever you are in the world, you can't fully understand the lens, but you can absolutely do your best to understand the lenses in which those individuals look through and be the best possible allies that we can be. And all of those who are suffering right now cannot make change by preaching to the converted. It must come through involving, embracing as many people as we possibly can. So this maintains the momentum and is not just one of these things which people say, oh, isn't it terrible, and then it disappears again, because it I would hope that it gains the momentum that the Me Too movement has, frankly.
Yes.
Because something absolutely has to change. And to your point, business leaders and CEOs in particular do have a epic responsibility to make a difference within wider society. It is not, the modern 21st century CEO, as you say, is not just running a company. They are leading and impacting what happens within the world and within wider society. And so it's so great to hear that CEOs like yourself are willing to speak up about this, because I think that the worst thing to do, and I heard I was watching an interesting interview the other day that said, really worried about what to say out there in the public, but actually the most wrong thing ever would be to not say anything at all, because actually, modest as some CEOs and leaders may be, actually there's individuals, there's communities, there's employees, there's friends, family, lots of people who look up to individuals in leadership positions to see what they're going to be doing or what action they're taking. To your point, it is about action. So, I think you said earlier as well, actually, it is, people can see very easily these days, especially through digital, social media and freedom of speech, whether leaders actually mean what they say and not just are paying lip service to this.
Correct. And it is really a very interesting point about people not knowing what to say and feeling that they may be in some way demonized for saying the wrong thing. And I think maybe this is me being slightly judgmental as well, but there's a degree to which that misses the point of allyship across all minority groups, because allyship is far more about listening than talking. And as a leader, it's about creating an environment where people are okay to talk. So the most important thing to say is that you can see it and you're listening, and then let people talk and listen hard to what they're going through, educate yourself, try and understand as best you can. Don't say trite things like I get it, I empathise, I understand, because you don't, but just be there and stand next to people. And I think that's important. And, from just an employer duty of care perspective, having said that it's a global problem, it's clearly most acute in the States, and Alfa has offices in Texas and Detroit, and it has people all over the States. And, without breaking confidences and naming names, we've got people talking about, and the good thing is feeling able to talk about having that conversation with kids who have just got to driving age, and telling them that they can't trust a policeman or a woman. And I don't know how you were brought up, but I was brought up that if you're lost, go to somebody wearing a uniform. And that just seems a terrible thing to take away from a child, but moreover saying you will be stopped and this is how you need to behave. What an awful state of affairs. I mean, beyond unacceptable. But it's even more important that we create the situation where people can speak up and go get the support of colleagues, because the support is there. We just need to make sure they feel safe to speak.
Indeed, it is absolutely about having that place where people feel genuinely they are cared about, they are trusted, they feel they belong, and safe enough to be able to talk about these issues. And I mean, that story is terribly, terribly sad in and to itself, actually. And, I was also brought up like yourself to go and find someone in a uniform or an important person, as you're told when you're young, because the police are safe and care about looking after all of us. And some fantastic police officers there in the UK. I know many friends who are in the force, who are in the police and serve our country and do a fantastic job. And unfortunately, it is terrible that there are also terrible people who are in these positions of responsibility. But it makes you feel just completely saddened and to the verge of tears, that actually, well, if families and parents are telling their kids this, well, who then is out there protecting them in society as a child? That would make you feel so incredibly vulnerable. Not, well, who'd you go to then if you're out and about? How absolutely
it just seems to be an incredible breach of trust, doesn't it? And of course, what I should have mentioned is my father was a Metropolitan Police officer between the army and a career in manufacturing.
Wow.
And he would have been desperately saddened. And of course, we find ourselves painted with broad strokes, and it's really important for people, obviously, not to project that across all police officers, all institutions, but it's something that's just horribly sick in our society, and it's at that societal level that it needs to go, because institutions, organizations, they're just following a lead that successive generations have created. It's very, very uncomfortable to talk about, more than any other kind of bigotry and bias in my experience. But we need to start that dialogue, and we need to fix it, because I don't want my kids are completely colorblind. They're completely unbigoted. They just don't see it. They're without prejudice. And I don't think it's right that they come into this situation as adults having to try and fix this. We should fix our own proverbial. So I don't swear on your podcast.
It's fine. I think it deserves swearing, frankly. So no, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, it's interesting because I have great faith and hope in our future generations of leaders, many of which you have working within the Alfa organisation, because, and I often hear parents and leaders say this, that their kids are colourblind, or their kids literally, they're friends with who they're friends with. However, I also hear the contrary argument, which is, don't worry, it's going to go away in the next generations. It'll naturally just disapparate. And I always feel, well, to your point, how is that fair? Eventually it may go, but there's so many different multifaceted areas of diversity and inclusion, which I think strongly relates to CSR. And of course, we have, ethnicity, but what about all of the invisible diversities, be it mental health, be it social mobility, which we touched on very briefly, be it LGBTQ plus in some instances, not always visible. So lots and lots of things there. It is a constant, ever-long, evolving journey. So, and I really do think it is critical that we look at as many of those as we possibly can, and don't, like you say, kind of lump it in and presume that the next generations are going to fix it, because it's completely unfair to leave them with that issue to deal with. But great.
And frankly, it'll take too long. This is embedded in the culture, it's institutionalized, so we need to get it out. I mean, we really can't afford on many of these levels to wait for a generation on everything that you just described. We can't wait a generation. If it's wrong, we should get on and fix it. And I think we have an opportunity to do it. So we should.
Absolutely. Let's talk then about call to actions, because I'm fortunate that I know a number of the team that work within Alfa and some of the young aspiring leaders that you have. In fact, Brannon, who came on the podcast before and was talking effusively and has said personally to me, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing, that it's a bit of an open door policy. He can come up and knock on the CEO's door and say, hey, Andy, I've got this idea about this. What do you think? And I remember the first time I ever came into the office, and I was watching some of your young aspiring grads sticking Post-it notes all over the walls. And I was chatting about the stuff that they're doing around D&I and CSR, and effusively told me about everything they did, and that their CEO quite happily backed it, and they weren't worried in any way, shape or form to literally trot on up and go and knock on your door because it's open and that's fine. And I think that in itself is a great example of what organizations need to be like. So 21st century leaders, 21st century organizations, maybe they aren't necessarily in the realms of a four-walled office anymore, they are in this digital world, but having open free access where CEOs and leaders are listening to what younger leaders and not just younger leaders, but other aspiring leaders within the organization have to say, and actually implementing that. So I wonder, can we talk a little bit about, some of the great stuff that you guys are doing around CSR and some of the stuff that you're doing around D&I, and, how the culture internally is open and free speech is welcome? Because I know you've done a number of pieces, and you champion internally, internal events and talking openly about what people think, which I just think is excellent, absolutely excellent.
It's one of our values, actually, challenge without being challenging. It's how we deal with our customers at work. It's important for us to say, yeah, actually, I probably wouldn't do it like that, but let's have a chat about it. But we also need to live and breathe that value internally. Implicit in that is doing it the right way, respectfully. That's not just up, but it's downwards as well. But it should be an environment where everything is challenged, and of course, speaks to the challengeable. It speaks to the heart of D&I, doesn't it? Because one of the really obvious that people still don't seem to get their heads around, and all of us are on a journey, all of us could do better within our companies, but the goal is not to have the same group of white, straight men from the same background in the same room making the same decision and not challenging each other, but actually reinforcing crazy groupthink. I want to hear what Brandon has to say. He has some crazy ideas too, so do I. But between us and between all 300 plus of us, we'll come up with some fantastic ideas from different backgrounds and different viewpoints. So we need to be able to challenge ourselves. Interestingly, one of the constructs that we use for doing that is, and I had one of these yesterday, and I hope Lucia will listen to this, because I kind of got to know her a bit better yesterday. But wherever I possibly can, I try to be the first person who does any training for anybody who joins Alfa. And I do an introduction to the company, which is, so far so vanilla. But hopefully that breaks down a barrier. And I always give everybody the same challenge, that at some point in the next month or so, have a meeting with me, get in the schedule, and come tell me how you're doing. And whilst the metaphorical open door, of course, is there, unsurprisingly, I'm pretty busy, so you have to be a little bit tenacious. But I had a Zoom with Lucia, who's just come in on the latest intake yesterday, and we got to know each other a little bit. But I figured that if we can do that, then it takes down the barrier. She'll feel that there's nobody in the business that is unapproachable. And I genuinely do feel that communication is there. You also, I think you have to embed certain things in your culture and your reward system, and you'll know better than anybody that measurement, metrics and rewards will drive behaviour. So there really is nothing to be gained at Alfa for keeping information to yourself, being political, working in ways that lock other people out. In fact, you get rewarded, praised and promoted for doing quite the opposite. So if you can set up structures like that, and then, as we've talked a few times, you then have to make sure that you walk the talk and you're prepared to be challenged, and all the top team are prepared to be challenged. And not only does that mean you get the best innovation, the best initiatives, the best work out of people because they're enthused and motivated, but again, for me, I have to come to work as well, and that's the kind of place I want to work too. I want to work at the company I lead, and that seems like such a trite thing to say, but it's so important. And I think it's one of those, look in the mirror and ask yourself truly the questions: do you really want to work there? Even on a tough day, do you want to work there? Because I do, because I get to hang out with the people I really like and respect, and they make my work life fantastic.
That is so true. The old classic is people leave bosses, not companies. And I think it is terribly true, because when people feel they belong in an environment, and clearly those in Alfa do, every time I come into the offices, I'm not just saying this, there's someone having fun, there's someone, like even just at reception. So when I come and sit at reception, I'll have a good old chat and a natter with those at reception, and it's got that welcoming feel about it. And you can tell, I've walked into plenty of boardrooms and plenty of organisations, and you suddenly straighten your back if it feels slightly stiff to be there. But I think it, is about creating that culture where people want to work. As I don't think it's particularly trite, but I do think it is absolutely, it's right. If you don't enjoy coming to work, if you dread going in, my goodness, is it the right place to work? Because you spend more time there than you do with your friends, family, and loved ones.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you a fun story about reception. Is everybody we hire, and as you know, we've recently had the privilege of appointing some pretty cool senior people, including some non-execs. So including them, I often ask people how many interviews they think they've had, and they'll say 2, 3, 7, or whatever. Generally 2, and if you're an engineer, you get a technical evaluation as well. And you say to the people who think they had 2, you had 3, and the people who think they had 3, you had 4. And the Nets had 1 more than they thought they had, because whenever anybody leaves the building, we immediately go to reception and say, what were they like? And anybody lacking humility, without the right approach to dealing with reception, they're just not coming in the door. It doesn't matter how important or good they were, because we all play our part, don't we? And it's a big test, particularly for graduates. You'd be surprised at how many back themselves and are a little bit arrogant with receptionists. 1, don't. And 2, actually, that's really silly as well, because they tend to be gatekeepers to important people. So it's just a very bad approach to business, right?
Exactly. It says it all. It's the age-old adage of, how someone treats a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, how they perhaps really are. And I think that's very true indeed. Before we run out of time today, and thanks so much for sharing, I think there's some great actionable points there, which we'll summarise in the show notes at the end of today's show. But I know you've listened to the podcast before, and so you know what is coming next, and that is the lightning round. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, or because it's you, Ant, I'm going to give you a minute to answer each of the following questions. But first and foremost, what does diversity, inclusion, and belonging truly mean to you personally?
It's supposed to be a lightning round, so I'm thinking about it because it's so fundamental. I mean, what it means to me personally is words I would use are words like obvious. It is so not obvious that you should not be inclusive. It's so not obvious that you shouldn't have diversity as much as you can. And as I said, we're on a journey. I would love our gender diversity to be better at Alfa. Nobody's perfect. We're all trying to get somewhere that we need to be. But it's just so obviously the correct thing to do. So that's what it means to me. It means obvious. Do it.
Great answer. I've never had that one before, and you're absolutely right. Look, no one and no organisation is perfect, and we can always improve. But I think it's the right attitude to have, because if we thought, imagine getting up one day and going into the organisation as a CEO and thinking, "Haha, we've done it. Diversity, inclusion, it's sorted. Yes, we've made it. We've achieved self-actualization. It ain't going to happen. But absolutely, and I think it's important as well for everyone to remember that gender diversity absolutely critical. Those visible diversity is absolutely critical. And hey, I'm breaking my own rule now because I'm talking over the 30 seconds. But all of those invisible diversities that we've talked about, the things that you guys look at and that you spearhead, around CSR and around LGBTQ+, and around invisible diversities like mental health and race, and sorry, that one's not obviously an invisible diversity, but all the other facets.
But you're right, aren't you? That we've talked before on I'll advertise a different podcast that we've done, or a different webcast, but yes. Right now, it's really, really important to understand that inclusion is very, very far-reaching, and unusually on a business podcast, I'll quote from Leila and Stitch. But nobody can be left behind. It's super important now, with respect to mental health, that nobody can be left behind. Check in on everybody. Who's not using the Zoom? Who's not using the chat rooms? Who's not got the contact? And those are the people we should care about, right?
Absolutely, the ones that aren't saying anything. Couldn't agree more. And I think it was wonderful learning about your background, I have to say. So I know I'm completely breaking my own rule here, but I think what you demonstrate, if you don't mind me saying, is the background that you've come from in your family, real kind of hard working grafters, kind of in your father in the police and in the forces, same as my family, really hard working class professionals. Mum worked for the NHS for many years, and dad worked for various different people and organisations and entrepreneurs and whatnot. But actually, it is that upward social mobility, which you wouldn't know by looking on the surface, I could make a presumption and think, what, Andy was, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and look where he is, must have been easy for him. It's not always the case. And I think we must encourage people to talk and not just make these presumptions from surface level that a person must be a certain way, because as you said before, you want to break that whole group think situation. It's about the diversity of thought and the diversity of background that brings those ideas of innovation and difference to the boardroom table, whatever we might look like.
It's all part of the same narrative, isn't it? There's a spectrum of diversity, and we tend to put it into little compartments, and that's kind of reasonable because it helps us understand. But everybody's on their different journey, and you're right. Nobody gave anything to me, but then again, I'm not black, and if I was, it would be way harder, practically impossible. So everybody's different, and everybody's running on a different journey, and everybody's got their own stuff to worry about.
Absolutely, and it's that intersectionality as well. I know we briefly mentioned, which will be released very soon, is our questionnaire, which we're sending out to lots of CEOs. I know that you will fill it out, which will be fantastic.
I will.
But ultimately, it is about how those different facets, which we do, to a degree, I suppose we do compartmentalize them, as you say, so that we can understand better and we can look after those groups. But the intersectionality that weaves throughout those and how they intertwine within each other, I think is absolutely fascinating. For example, I suppose I identify as BAME, really, but I also have been brought up by white British parents, having been adopted. So there's a number of different facets, and gender-wise, I can't relate directly to LGBTQ+, but he certainly can, to mental health, per se. So we all, absolutely many different, wonderful characteristics that make us each up as human beings. And anyway, I could talk to you about this forever and a day, and this is meant to be the lightning round with you. So
yeah, I've messed it up for you.
No, you haven't. It was my fault. I will shoulder the blame on that one. But next, I wonder, and you did obviously say your father, who clearly has been fantastic inspiration to you, but who has, we could name a number of people, personal, professional, who have been kind of the biggest role models to you, or real models even?
My granddad, artisanship, a little North London man who could paint a street, mend a watch, write a sign. He had 3 sets of tools, one for best, one for use, one for lending. And so many hours in his room, plenty of business leaders that I think, as I'd encourage anybody with any of this, you learn the good and the bad, and the object lessons are as important as the respect and the learning. So you shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal. But I have to say, I love Apple stuff, and I grew up being fascinated and inspired by the way that Steve Jobs innovated. I'm no fan of his psychopathy, his family values, or on some levels his approach to leadership, but focus on industrial design, not allowing himself to be compartmentalized. So this idea of category destruction, which marketeers talk about, that why don't we smash a phone and a Walkman together? Why don't we, that I'm looking at you on, create a computer that usability and form factor is at least as important as the software and the function. So, definitely him. As an institution, and I'll plug a book because I plug it very often. There's a great book called Legacy, which is about the All Blacks rugby team. And I'll hold my hand up as being a rugby guy. I love the game. But Legacy is far more about an institution and values, from sweeping the floor afterwards. So they always swept out the kit room, and it's or the changing room, and that's overloaded to say that we just take it in turns to sweep the floor. There are no prima donnas. The idea of looking after the shirt. It's not your shirt. All you're doing is keeping it for the next generation. The no dicks rule. I could go on, but it's they're an amazing institution. They're excellence personified. Don't get everything right, of course they don't, but as a team, difficult not to admire them.
And the great thing, again, I'm totally breaking my own rules here, but great example, and we will put the book into the show notes for the end of today's show. But very, very quickly, I did a podcast with John Dutton from the Rugby League World Cup. Absolutely fantastic. How incredibly inclusive they're making that sport. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted by all of the stuff that they're doing. But the Wheelchair Rugby League World Cup, if you've ever seen it, I mean, it's brutal, but it is amazing. Yeah. Everyone's involved. And I think sport can be a huge driver for change, as you allude to there.
It's a very, very physical game, but it's an astonishing and inclusive community. I suspect a lot of people who, and this is the classic thing about stereotyping stuff, isn't it? But I think a lot of people would be very, very surprised if they got involved in it. I mean, I've never been an amazing rugby player, but I remember as a student cutting my teeth. All of the clubs I played for, including university, they all have women's teams, and many of them, women's teams was a thing in rugby, I would say, before it was a big deal in soccer, football. It's a sport that might surprise a few people, but of course, with more prominence to some of the good that it's doing, I think people are maybe seeing it a bit too.
I agree. Second to last question is a big one. What's your secret to success? I ask this to everyone, and I always find the answers interesting whilst you're thinking.
I don't think it's particularly it's a secret. I think I try and do the right things. I think I'm very aware that I won't always and haven't always. So I suppose I'm going to give my my great friend, colleague, and our Chief Operating Officer, Matthew White, who we often say that between us we're a good CEO, because I'm not so focused on the operational stuff, but Matt is amazing. He very much talks about no deal regret, and I think you can extend that concept, right? You can talk about what you've done wrong, you can improve, but just don't regret stuff. As long as you can be confident that everything that you've ever done was the right thing to do, with the data, with the circumstances, but don't look back and regret stuff. Just try and do your best. I don't think that's a massive secret, is it really?
It's a great answer. And Matt, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are, we'll have to get you on the podcast as well to talk about this in more depth.
Yes. Yeah.
And finally, before we wrap up for today, I wonder if you could go back in time, and I must choose my words correctly here, and give advice to the very young Andy. What might you say? Or in fact, if it's someone who's in a similar situation, who's thinking, hey, what do I go off and do now? And, right at the beginning of my career, what advice would you give if you could?
Make sure you do something you love, because you can only truly be good at something if you love doing it. I believe that. And therefore, the path to doing that is not to box yourself in. Embrace opportunity, find the opportunities, try everything you possibly can. That implies not running before you can walk. It implies getting a level of understanding and experience before you set down maybe a path for life. Maybe you keep swapping paths. I mean, maybe that's what you enjoy. Maybe you enjoy the variety. But I would encourage myself, and I did it by accident because I joined the right company, had the right mentors and role models around me, and I was able to I thought I was a computer scientist. It turned out I was wrong. You can get me riffing about the fact that young people really are asked to commit to a forever path very early. At Alfa, we didn't and still don't do that. We encourage people to try different things and see what they're good at. As I said, I was lucky to do that, but I would definitely tell my younger self to make sure that I have those opportunities. I have regretted things and maybe I shouldn't have. So I definitely give myself that no regrets mentality. That's not to say that you can't improve, and that's not to say you couldn't have made better decisions, but at least understand that in good faith you probably made the best decision you could at the time, and don't spend too much time tearing yourself up about it. If I have a weakness, it's probably that. I tend to overanalyze, overthink, over-critique myself. I'm getting better, as you were kind enough to point out. I have got older, but it's still a little weakness. I should maybe knock that on the head.
Andy, thanks so much. What a fantastic way actually to end the podcast. I think you've been a brilliant guest, and I really appreciate you being here because I know how very busy you are.
Time has flown.
It has indeed, and I know that you have to shoot, but I'm super quickly going to do a brief summary as I always do. But I think a huge amount of learning points from today. most notable of all, I think, for me is actually getting to know you and getting to know leaders on a personal level. And I think Andy's a really fantastic example of what a brave yet vulnerable leader looks like, and someone who's willing to have this, metaphorically speaking, kind of open door policy. Actually, it's about listening, and I think, as Andy said quite rightly, it's about listening to the opinions of others and being able to actually guide and bring people along with the journey within the organisation, really live and speak and breathe those values. I think there's some great actionable points there for other CEOs and other leaders, wherever you may be within the leadership continuum at present, actually heeding advice from eclectic voices around you, speaking out about things that are absolutely fundamentally wrong, because the worst thing to do is to say nothing. You are leading an organisation. There's people who follow you, so take that responsibility, as Andy has done. But also to make sure that there are safe places within the workplace. There's no good putting values up or mission statements up on websites and not doing what you say. As Andy says, you must walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk, and so make sure you do put actionable points against those words that mean a lot, I'm sure, to many people within the organisation. So, and finally, so I would say as well, just on the vulnerable leadership piece, I think that the leader of the future is genuinely one that is brave enough to be vulnerable, and one that is brave enough to be open and modest, and happy to talk about their upcomings, their shortcomings, and to be sufficiently challenged by others. So, Andy, thank you very much for that indeed again.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks again. And my phones are going crazy, so I'm going to have to jump off, but thanks for the opportunity. Really enjoyed chatting.
Thanks a million, Andy. You can check everything out at www.darglobal.org/podcast, where all the show notes will be there. See you again very, very soon. Take care now. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.